Precious God, we thank you for this opportunity to gather as a community. We thank you for this informative program that is before us. And we thank you for receptive hearts, minds, and spirits for the information that you will send. Continue to guide us and walk with us and show us your way. Receive this prayer. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not flunk. He keeps me from lying down when I should be studying. He leads me beside a vending machine for study breaks. He restores my faith and study habits for my grades' sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of borderline grades, I will not have a nervous breakdown, for you are with me. My prayers and my friends that comfort me. You give me answers in moments of blankness. You anoint my head with understanding. My test paper runs over with questions I recognize. Surely flying grades and flying colors with passing grades shall follow me all the days of midterm exams, and I shall not have to stay at Bennett College forever. Amen.
Amen. Thank you all for coming out this morning. We're going to start the program shortly. Our two guests were a little bit behind getting out of the hotel this morning, so before we get going with that, we have a couple of announcements. I'm going to bring up Professor Jeffries to talk about a great opportunity for you all to study in Spain this summer.
It's June 18th through July 16th. their classes, the way this set up, it is Jewish classes during the day, Monday through Thursday. Evenings and weekends will be excursions, it's on Park Beach, and they'll take you around and do all this stuff.
Thank you, ma'am. Miss Brandy Govan has been doing a little research on Martin Luther King, and earlier this week, Monday night, we did a screening of Selma, and we had one of the actresses that was in the film to come out, and they had a wonderful discussion before and after the screening Monday night in the GLC. So she's going to do something on MLK's speech when he came here to Greensboro, and Bennett College invited him in when no one else would.
My name is Brandy Govan. I'm a freshman in studies and So, I've been doing research on Martin Luther King. In 1958, Martin Luther King came to the college. He started in high science and he was a child. He was talking to the he was talking to the community about how you have to be the activist and how to speak up for what's right for you, what you want to do for yourself. During his speech, I put up a quote that was really important to me, and I want you guys to think about this quote. This quote is, "We must not forget about that plane. The plane will not take off without a ground crew." Let us not forget about, we must not forget about the people in the headlines, but the headlines are also important. So when you go about your day, I want you to think about how the ground crew, like your friends and your family, and how they supported you, and how you're here, and how they did one another doing the ground crew to be sure that you are ready to be successful in life. So if it's possible, I want you to thank the ground crew today for all of this stuff.
Thank you, ma'am. So I'm playing installer right now as our guests come in, but that's something that I'm fine with doing. One thing that I want to draw your attention to, if you look at the flyers, we have events going on this evening and tomorrow, and we would love for you all to come out. There's a huge treat after the screening Friday night where we're having the 70s Shafter party, because we're going to screen Shaft, and we want everyone dressing in their 70s gear, coming out to see, I don't know, who can, I don't know, dress the best in their 70s.
Prizes. Does anybody have any 70s clothes all picked out? Where would you get them if you didn't have them already? There you go. See, college students are very resourceful on a budget.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to tell you, raise your hand if you had a chance to come out and see 12 Years a Slave last night. Okay, great. Now, one thing that would be interesting is that 12 Years a Slave, raise your hand if you know where that movie came from, where the initial movie came from. I see somebody there in the back. Can you shout out here? Is that Damaris? Did anybody know? Okay, there was a autobiographical book written in the mid-1800s about a man. I don't want to give away the movie, but he told his story. So one thing that, if you ever think about writing a movie, that why is it that somebody could you write a movie about a book that was done in the mid-1800s? Does anybody know that? Not my BB law students, but anybody else. Raise your hand if you think you have a guess. It's okay if you're on. Do you think you could just go and write a movie of your own about a book that was written in the 1800s? No. There's something called copyright. And copyright says that if you go out and write a book, somebody else can't make a movie out of your book. However, one important thing to know as students is that copyright expires. So any book written before 1923 is in what's called the public domain, which means that anybody can make a movie of it. So if there's a movie before that time period, you could take and make a music video out of it. So media at some point becomes to where anybody can use it. And also if you search on the web, you can find other movies after that time period that are also in the public domain. And that's kind of an interesting thing. If you notice, you see a lot of movies about historical subjects and a lot of movies about the Bible and Greek mythology. And one of the reasons is that you don't have to buy the rights to the book. So the thing that you're going to see tonight is the first movie based on the novel 12 Years a Slave. And that's called Solomon Northrop's Odyssey. And it's very interesting because those of you who saw the movie last night, you'll get a chance to see two versions of the same story. And I'd be curious to talk to those of you who had seen it to see how maybe you liked one version versus the other version. And the version tonight stars Avery Brooks. Does anybody know Avery Brooks? And so tomorrow, just to give you a heads up, there's also going to be another historical movie, and it's going to be Denmark BC Slave Rebellion. And it's the story of a free man living in Charleston who organized a slave rebellion. And I don't want to give away too much of the story there. And that stars the actor Antonio Fargas. Okay, so I tried to explain who Antonio Fargas was to a lot of students. And I did it the wrong way because I explained the term of my movies, and I was corrected. So raise your hand if you know, what would a college student now know Antonio Fargas from? Does anybody know?
Huggy Bear.
Who said Huggy Bear?
I said Huggy Bear.
Okay, Huggy Bear. And I tried that, and that didn't work with the students. But here's what does work with students. Has anybody seen Everybody Hates Chris? Yes. Okay. Does anybody like Doc? Doc from Everybody Hates Chris. Okay. He'll be on campus. He's in Las Vegas right now, leaving. Doc is in Las Vegas right now, leaving on a plane bound for GSO Airport. And he will be out late tonight. Hopefully we'll be able to bring him by tonight, but definitely tomorrow. So all of your questions. And we were watching an episode of that last night, Everybody Hates Chris, a couple of nights ago. And they were trying to break Doc up with his girlfriend. Has anybody ever seen that episode? And the thing cut off before the end of it. So I don't know, did Doc ever get back with Robin Givens' character? Did anybody know that one? When Chris tried to break them up? They get back. Okay, so if you want to know about working on that show, Minnie, and Antonio Fargas has literally worked throughout the generations. And his first breakout role came in the 70s, and then he was also in a movie that we're going to see tomorrow that Professor Coleman mentioned, Shaft. And Shaft was directed by Gordon Parks. And Gordon Parks is a great person to honor because he's involved in a lot of different disciplines. He was into music, so Dr. Parker is going to be able to present a little bit on Gordon Parks' music. He did the music for the sequel to Shaft. And also Gordon Parks was a great photographer. If you ever have a chance to go on the web, go on and look at some of his photographs. And he was the first African American to direct a major studio film. But the cool thing about today is we have friends of Gordon Parks here. And en route from Austin, Texas, Gordon Parks' son's going to be here. But without further ado, I want you to give a Bennett College welcome to producer Shep Morgan and producer Paul Brock, who's also the founder of the National Association of Black Journalists. And they're going to come up into this TV living room that we've set up and talk to Mr. Coleman about some of their experiences and give us a chance to share their memories of Gordon Parks and talk about some of their careers. Let's give them a round of applause.
We were how we doing today? Hi, how are you? Have a seat here. Each of you have a mic. Okay.
Was Tom really?
He set you up. He set you up just fine. Set you all up just fine. I just want to start the day by thanking you all for coming and being a part of our film festival. We want to especially thank Mr. Brock because it was really his encouragement to get this film festival going. He talked with myself and Tom and Ms. Jeffries about making this a reality last semester when he was here, and sure enough, it came true. So thank you so much for putting in the time and effort to help get this off the ground.
Glad to do it.
We want to jump into some of the things you all are known for, but starting with how you got into filmmaking, and especially the types of films that you both have gravitated towards.
We'll start with that, Shep.
Well, I started at the documentary unit at KCBS, WCBS in New York, working with some wonderfully talented people, including a really fine black editor, one of the few who was working then, John Carter, who went on to edit a lot of major motion pictures. And I learned filmmaking because they were really doing film then. Videotape was around, but we were still doing film documentaries that were broadcast every week. And I started as a production assistant and worked my way up to director, but I spent hours with some really talented people who taught me a lot and gave me the sense that this is what I wanted to do. So that's really how I got started.
Okay.
I'd like to add a little. I really got started, of course, as a journalist in the U.S. Virgin Islands, both in radio and later in television. And following that, a number of people from New York would come down to the islands on vacation. And after a few drinks, they would tell me how good I was and I was ready for New York. Little did I know, they didn't know what they were talking about. But following the March to Selma, and I came home one day and found my children intently listening to that march and the ensuing melee that followed when the police and the state troopers tried to stop those marchers from marching over the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And I asked them if they knew what was going on. And they replied to me, or at least one replied to me, I think those policemen that are beating those Negroes. And at that time, the popular word was Negro. And I said, that's very good. And I was very pleased, being a news person, that they were listening. But as I started to leave the room, something didn't ring true. And I went back, and I had 4 children as a bachelor father. And I said, did any of you guys know any Negroes? And they started scratching their head and looking at one another and wondering if they knew any Negroes. They later decided they knew one. And that was a neighbor that I was very friendly with, and he was a bassist who played at the local nightclub from St. Louis, named Jimmy Hurd. Jimmy was way ahead of his time. He always wore a dashiki, always had a bush, when no one else in the entire world, except maybe in Africa, had a bush or dashiki. And they decided that was the only Negro that they knew. And on that day, of March 7th, 1965, I decided that it was time for me to leave the Virgin Islands, or my kids were going to be in deep, deep trouble if they didn't know who they were and what they were going to face in the world. I want to skip on because from that, I had a very difficult time finding work in New York and had to do part-time work. I finally got someone to vouch for me, the general counsel of ABC Network, who demanded that they hire me for a new program that they were starting called Wide World of Sports. So I said, well, I finally made it. I'm here. And when I reported to work, they told me, well, we won't have you sign up just yet because we understand you have children and we really need a single person who can travel all over the world. And I said, oh yeah, I can do that. I live with my mother and she'll take care of the children. That was not the truth, but at least I told it like that. And each time I came in to sign my paper to be hired, there was a different excuse. They were afraid not to hire me because they had been ordered to by the network general counsel. And they were determined that they were not going to hire me for whatever reasons that they thought were appropriate. That program was called Wide World of Sports. I don't think any of you have heard of it, but it lasted 20 years without me, of course. I later did find work, a part-time work in New York, eventually went to Washington, D.C., and again found myself looking for work, having to do other things until I could get back into journalism. And a miracle happened. I was down to $13 in my bank account and the phone rang. And one of the people who had worked on Wide World of Sports had been asked to come to Washington to start a new station, WETA, which is one of the leading stations in the Washington, D.C. area today. And he called. I was out of work, $13 in the bank. My children asking, what are we going to have for dinner tonight? And I didn't have the heart to tell them nothing. And the person identified himself and said, wanted to find out, I'm starting up a radio station. It'll be a non-profit station, and would like to find out whether you're interested in being the news director. I was so excited I could have jumped out of there to where he was in Virginia. But I tried to maintain my cool, and I said, well, I'm willing to come in and talk to you about it, no commitments. But anyway, I did go in to talk to him about it. I accepted the job, and from then on, I've been hired ever since, except when I wanted to go into another field or do it for someone else. I would like to expound just a wee bit on Shep relationship and our relationship. There came a time when I went to New York and Benjamin Hooks, who became the head of the national NAACP, was looking for someone to come up there with him as his communications director. I had known Mr. Hooks, Reverend Hooks, when he was on the FCC board, and he asked me to take that job. I thought it would be challenging. I was deeply rooted in the civil rights community in the Washington, D.C. area. I agreed to take that job. And doing that job, we decided that Reverend Hooks, for higher exposure, needed to have his own television show. And I began looking around for someone that could produce it, had experience producing, and could do this show that we anticipated would be somewhat of a national television show. And I got several recommendations about a person by the name of Shep Morgan. And I called him, we talked, he accepted the challenge, and we did a national television series of the NAACP convention for 3 or 4 years, I believe, with Carl Rowan as the host of the show and several other journalists who were getting stories out from the various workshops and of the NAACP convention. The gist of the story, and let me finish it. One day, I asked Shep, a movie was coming out. It was called Beulah Land. And again, none of you will remember this. We're talking about the early 80s. In Beulah Land, the story of what slavery and emancipation was like was not truthful. They had parts of it in which they had slaves on a plantation were begging their master not to put them off the plantation because they enjoyed life so much on the plantation, being whipped every now and then to stay in line and so forth and so on. They had one character who worked his way up on the Underground Railroad to Canada, but missed his life on the plantation as a slave in Georgia, that he worked his way back down because he'd rather be a slave on the Georgia plantation than a free man up in Canada. And there were similar untruths in that story. And representing Mr. Hooks, I went to a meeting of the producing firm, Paramount, and they were embarrassed, of course, by this. They had the producer come in, and we went through arguing over whether the movie should be released or not. And finally, the producer said, well, listen, if you people don't like the way I made my movie, you should make your own movie. And I was a little offended by it, but as I went back to the East Coast, I began thinking he's absolutely right. He is absolutely right. And I called Shep, and I said, Shep, can we raise money to make our own movie? And at that time, he was on a national board for the managers. And he said, I think I can raise a few dollars for it. And out of that came the script for Denmark Vesey's Rebellion. And as many of you may know or will hear today, that the result of that film, produced by Shep, was, I believe, it was nominated for about 15, 16, 17 Image Awards. It won, I believe, 9 of those awards. It was the first time anything of this magnitude had been produced and done. It aired on the PBS, and it is alive today. Why? Because, as many of you may remember, this past summer, President Obama went to Charleston, South Carolina to preach at the memorial service for the 9 people who were killed at Mother AME's Zion Church. And he talked about the film that had been made in that church. You're seeing the gentleman who made that film, Shep Morgan. I was a part of the company. Shep was the president, I was the vice president. And that film showed Charleston and the man, Denmark Vesey, who was very, very well off. And he was a little arrogant, maybe a little like Donald Trump these days. Not completely like Donald Trump, hopefully. But he was a free black back in 1820. And he built that church. He bought his freedom first. He then built that church. And that church, they would not sell him his wife and his child. And as a result of that, his anger said, then I'll just burn this place down and escape with all of the slaves to Haiti or Santo Domingo or one of the Caribbean islands. That was his plan.
Let's get Mr. Morgan to talk about that filmmaking process, the research that goes into doing a historical film like that.
Well, first of all, you have to flash back to the 80s, which I'm guessing some of you guys only have a dim memory of. But the whole concept of black history was radically different then, quite different than now when 12 Years a Slave was made by Steve McQueen. But we assembled a board of historical advisors, professors at top universities around the country. Many of them were white, some of them were black, not as many as there would be now. And they wanted to do programs that showed the full scope of slavery. Up until then, I think the focus had been on roots, and roots had bad masters and slaves who were struggling. And that's not to say that that wasn't an important part of slavery. But a lot of the advisors felt that Roots was very one-dimensional. Incidentally, it's been remade, and it's going to be broadcast, I think, in March or April. So if you get a chance, watch the new Roots, and then go back if you can and get the DVD of the old Roots. I think it'll be an interesting comparison. But the advisors wanted to show the complexity of slavery, that there were not necessarily good masters, but there were masters who weren't, Steinman Legree in the stereotypical sense. And that slaves formed communities. They loved and they lived in spite of what they were suffering. They had religion, they had families, and they managed somehow, under really difficult conditions, to hold it all together. And that's one of the things that they wanted to portray, was the fact that slavery is something we'll never forget, but it was very complex and it had a lot of dimensions.
One element of what we're going to do here Friday is show Shaft, and that gets into the black exploitation as it's termed. Since you all knew Gordon Parks, what would he think of that term, black exploitation?
He would have been very upset. His first film, which made him, Tom may have mentioned it before we came in, which made him the first black American to direct a feature film, the first black American to direct a feature film in Hollywood. He did Learning Tree, which was an adaptation of his semi-autobiographical novel about growing up black in a small town, Fort Scott, in Kansas. But when they came to him with Shaft, he had a sense, I think, that the door had been opened for him in Hollywood, and maybe this was another step in the right direction. And so he got excited about it, even though he didn't have nearly as much control over the film as he did over Learning Tree. And he was proud of it. He was proud of Richard Roundtree, that sexy black dude who just took over everybody. White, black, women, men, all were fascinated by Shaft. And Gordon said, you know, I always had a sense that a lot of kids from Harlem were going downtown in New York and going to a theater and buying a ticket to see Shaft, and maybe it gave them a sense of empowerment. But then came Shaft's big score, and then they wanted him to do another sequel after that. And then he did a film called Leadbelly, of which he was very proud. Leadbelly was a famous black singer who had a life full of ups and downs. He was not a perfect person, but he was an amazing musician. And that film didn't get the kind of distribution that Gordon wanted. Paramount, who produced it, sort of turned their back on it. And as a result, he looked at the wave of blaxploitation films that had been following Shaft, and he pretty much gave up on Hollywood. He walked out. And Leadbelly was the last major Hollywood film that he ever made. He didn't come back.
One thing that I speak to...
Add something.
Oh, go ahead.
I'd like to add why Gordon Parks was such an important figure. First of all, the first time I went out to dinner with Gordon, we went to a restaurant he wanted to go to on Rodeo Drive. And when we left his hotel and was going to dinner, people on the street saw him coming along Rodeo Drive, and they were saying, "Good evening, Mr. Parks. Hello, Mr. Parks," and so forth. Almost everyone knew him. And when we walked into the restaurant, the waiters immediately responded to him and got us the best table in there. Many of them may not have been, well, they were all nationalities, let me put it that way. But all of them responded to him with kindness, courtesy, and admiration. That impressed me a great deal. And so when Gordon Parks was able to walk away from Hollywood, that was his protest. That was his protest against what Hollywood was doing. One other thing that you should know and remember, and that is, before Shaft was released, MGM was going into bankruptcy. They were not going to be on the face of the earth much longer. He was able, with Shaft, it was such a financial hit worldwide that he saved that famous production company diminishing.
One thing that we talk about in the JMS department is the power of gatekeepers and those who can close the door on many opportunities. What's some advice that you can give to our students who would like to pursue careers within media or other fields that can help them navigate those systems and understand that people are there that may not want them coming through the door?
Well, first of all, this may turn out to be a great time because the D word is circulating through Hollywood now. You know, diversity, all white Oscar nominees, there's been a huge reaction, and even maybe a little sense of fear in some of the studios and television production companies about what all this means. There's a rush now by the head of the Academy, Cheryl Boone-Isaacs, to bring a more diverse membership. But beyond that, I think the studios are looking at the diversity in their own ranks, and they're saying, we should be hiring more people of color. We should be hiring more people to show that we have ethnic diversity. And I don't know whether it's going to be a flash in the pan or not. And one thing for sure, even if it opens a door, you're going to have to work harder. You're going to have to try harder. You're going to have to be more determined than some of the less ethnically diverse people working next to you. And if you're willing to do that, and if doors are now opening, it could present, I think, some great opportunities.
Mr. Brock? I would add to that, all of you in here owe it to yourselves and to 10 others just like you who are not here to hear this message. And that is diversity. They're trying it out. They don't know if it will work completely. And for them, it will only work if it's financially successful. By that, I mean you go out to see it. Some of the best films that have been put out, many of us have not supported it. Many of us don't know whether we would like it or not, because the only way you can tell, you can't tell by someone else saying, oh, I thought it was great, or I didn't like it. You must go for yourself. You must support those films that are being experimented now, today, and yesterday, in the past few months. They are trying to find out whether this audience will come out for those diverse films.
I'd just like to add one other thing. Don't get trapped into thinking that you're going to make a film that will change the world. Because I personally, having lived and worked in Hollywood for a long time, don't think films necessarily change the world. I'm not sure the world is radically different because of 12 Years a Slave or Selma. Not that those films aren't important. But the important thing is to make a film that you care about. If it has a message, great. And if you can underline the message and burn up the screen with it, terrific. But if things don't change because of your film, don't be disappointed. Just try a little harder next time.
Are there any questions from the audience before we wrap it up? Anybody? Any parting shots from you gentlemen on the film industry, current state?
I will just add this. At my age, I don't know how many more years I have left, but I'm going to try to make a few films that will make a difference. But as Shep says, if I depend on making a difference and get disappointed, that should not discourage me. I just recently started a new company. It's called our Village Keepers, based on the old griots that used to go from African village to village, telling those villages their history, their customs, and many of the stories that they should know. Many of us don't know our history. When Denmark BC was made, 1983, 84, I was very, very proud of that work that Shep had done. In fact, at the beginning of it, I was still working for Benjamin Hooks, and Shep was down in South Carolina making the film. And the first group, I had a friend down at San Diego State, and I took it down to his classroom, a very mixed class, but about half African American. It was Black Studies. This Black Studies class at San Diego State, college students just like you, told me at the end of that film that we had done a work of fiction. And it was fiction because there was no such thing as free slaves back in 1820. And certainly there was no such thing as rich slaves back in 1820. I was very, very, very disappointed. But I had worked at Howard University, taught at Howard University, been the news director there at the Howard University radio station. And I said, let me take this back to Washington, D.C., where the students there know me and would not accuse me of doing a piece of fiction. And I did show it to them. And they came to see it. And I looked at the dour look on their face at the end of the screening. And a few students came up and said, Mr. Brock, you've done this work of fiction. There's no such thing. Every black person was a slave, and all they did was pick cotton. And I was very thoroughly disappointed, because I began to realize how few of us knew our own history. And the reason why we only knew our own history, because too many of us had been taught in school, in lower grades, who chopped down the cherry tree and could not tell a lie, but could throw a 50-cent piece across the Potomac River, and did not know who the first person in the Revolutionary War to die for his country was. Let me ask the question. How many of you in here right now know who could chop down a cherry tree and never tell a lie? Raise your hand. How many of you know? Only one person? No?
Yes, I'm down here.
Somebody call out the name.
George Washington.
George Washington. This group knows. This group didn't know. Okay. Now let me ask you the second question. The name of the first American to die in the Revolutionary War, shot. Okay, 5, 6, 7 people knew. The rest of you did not know? How many did not know? A lot of hands. Listen, you've got to start learning your history. Not that his history or his story is not important, but so is yours. Thank you.
I would just add one thing. This has all been a lot of this has been very heavy today, but filmmaking can be the greatest job in the world. People go to Hollywood for different reasons, to get rich, to win awards, maybe to make a mark on society, but also have fun. It can be one of the funnest jobs in the world if you really care about it, no matter what kind of film or what kind of television program you're making. There'll be a lot of struggles and a lot of disappointments, but it's still fun, and you can leave something really nice behind.
Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you, gentlemen, so much for coming out and being with us today. We look forward to watching the films later on today and having more discussions with you all this evening and tomorrow.
Okay.
I will have a couple of announcements. Again, if you are interested in the study abroad trip this thing in the summer, go to the JMS building at noon or about 5 minutes. The JMS department we're putting on the events for the Black History Media Festival. If you have this, if you don't, get one from the back. We would love to have a packed house tonight and tomorrow. Please come out to the party. It's free. Be a little snacks and stuff there. So come out and enjoy yourself.
And mentioned the Bennett before, we'll get special screening of Bennett, 2 o'clock at the JMS building with Dave Clark, School Clark's son, the producer. On that, if you have more questions for Mr. Morgan or Mr. Brock, we will be invited behind the hall after this event. So feel free to come by and have a chance to talk with these 2 in person. Let's give you another round.
Turn it back over to the ACES. And if any of you are interested in minoring in JMS, you can come over and see us.
All right.
We're gonna head over to